Welcome to this 35-minute video excerpt of a webinar I recently held on the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program. We had over 400 people attending that webinar, and from what I heard afterwards, I thought it would be good if my staff were to reduce that 60-minute webinar down to this 35-minute presentation that we prepared for you today. Now, you may know from your studies or research that this program was inaugurated back in 2007, but it failed to live up to expectations. It was determined that if students were to go into certain fields of public service as government workers, the federal, state, local, and tribal levels, as well as some private nonprofit 501c3 corporations, and make up to 120 payments or roughly 10 years, the debt would be forgiven. But that just did not happen. What we found out is after the first 10 years of the program's existence, in the first year that they were eligible for forgiveness, around 29,000 students, former students, applied, but only 1% were approved. That's right. 99% of those 29,000 were turned down. That was until Joe Biden was elected president back in 2020. And in 2021, he changed the rules and made the program viable, and it has turned out to be valuable. And so, in recent months, over 150,000 people have applied. Not just applied, but over 50,000 have had their loans. About $9 billion of loan guarantees have been forgiven. And so what we've decided to do, and that's what this video is all about, is to assist you in reapplying. Now, you got until October 31st. This program was to exist for a year, from October last year, 2021, to October 31st, 2022. And if you are eligible, you need to apply now. You've only got 2 months left to apply to have your student loan debt forgiven. Now, this program is utilizing the expertise of two people with long experiences in this field. They are going to share with you the things that you need to do in order to get your loan forgiven. And I want to present them to you at this moment.
My name is Mike Pierce. I'm the executive director of the nonprofit Student Borrower Protection Center. And I was a federal regulator for the student loan industry for a long time before I became a consumer advocate. And I've been working on public service loan forgiveness in some form or another all the way back to when it was just a bill, when it passed with Congressman Clyburn's support back in 2007. And as the Congressman mentioned, it's been a mess until right now. And today we're going to talk about why that's changed, why public service workers across South Carolina and across the country have a chance to get their debts canceled now, how that's working. Something like 10 times the number of public service workers have had their debts canceled just since October than in the 14 years before that. And we are in a place now where we have this limited window till the end of October, where every single public service worker in South Carolina and across the country that's eligible needs to get their debt canceled, but you have to take some steps. So we're going to walk through what the program is. We're going to walk through what the program does. I'm very lucky to be joined here by my friend Ashley Harrington from the Department of Education's Office of Federal Student Aid. She's going to walk through the specifics of this waiver, this limited opportunity to get your debts canceled, and then we're going to answer some questions. So with that, I'm going to share my screen, and we're going to walk through how this actually all works. But know that at studentaid.gov, there's lots of great information. You're going to hear both of us say studentaid.gov over and over and over again today. So all of the jargon, all the confusing points, you can get this stuff in English step by step on studentaid.gov and also on forgivemystudentdebt.org. That's a website that my organization runs along with the National Education Association, American Federation of Teachers, AFSCME, the American Association of University Professors, and the Teamsters, so a number of very large labor unions. This coalition is trying to help connect as many working people across the country as possible with debt cancellation. So just know that studentaid.gov and forgivemystudentdebt.org have all of this great information that we're going to talk about today. So with that, I'm going to share my screen and we're going to get into it. So what is public service loan forgiveness? As the congressman mentioned, this is the existing law. This has been on the books since 2007. Borrowers who work in public service that meet these criteria have had the right to get their debt canceled for a while. It hasn't worked. 99% of people who have tried to get their debt canceled up until October have been told to take a walk. And there's a whole bunch of reasons why that happens. Ashley and I are both going to talk about the tricks and traps along the way that have knocked people off track. But most importantly, I'm going to walk through what the program is, and then Ashley's going to tell you why it's going to work better for you, why it's going to be easier, why it's going to be faster, and why if you tried before and it didn't work, you shouldn't get discouraged. So to be able to get public service loan forgiveness, you need the right type of loan, the right type of repayment plan. You have to work in public service, and you have to do all of those things every month for 120 months. When I talk about the right type of loan, I mean a direct loan. That's a federal student loan made directly by the US Department of Education. Lots and lots of people, millions of people, have federal student loans that are not these so-called direct loans, particularly older borrowers like me that went to school back before 2010 and took out a loan from Citibank or Sallie Mae that was guaranteed by the federal government, but wasn't a direct loan. Those are known as FFELP loans or FFELP loans or federal family education loans. Again, lots of jargon. And we'll talk a little bit later about how to identify what kind of loan you have. But the important part is if you have one of those older loans made by a bank or a Perkins loan made by your school, there are steps you can take to turn them into direct loans. And once you do that, you can get on track. And we will talk a little bit more about how that used to work and how that's changed. But just remember, if you have a direct loan right now, don't stress any of this stuff. You're on track. If you don't have a direct loan right now, you're going to have to take some steps to be able to get on track. And a lot of what we're going to talk about today is really geared towards those older borrowers that have those older loans that need to take some steps to get on track. There are rules that might have knocked you off track before, particularly this big one, that if you take steps to make your old loans count, you lose all the credit for your public service work that came before that. That was the law of the land right up until Joe Biden changed the rules. He did that in October of last year, and it's only good for a year. But for the first time, for this 1 year window, Ashley's going to talk more about what this means, but just know that that rule about losing your progress, that doesn't apply right now, but only for a little while. We are also, I'm sure, going to get some questions later about Parent Plus loans. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about that right now. Just know that the normal public service loan forgiveness program is open to parents, but the waiver, there are some rules and some steps, and a lot of people won't actually be able to get access through this limited opportunity. So I'm not going to spend time on this now. I'm sure we're going to get to it in the Q&A, but know that the rules are a little different for parents. The next piece here is the right type of payment plan. Again, under the existing program, you need to be making payments based on your income. Importantly, payments have been paused, going all the way back to the beginning of the pandemic. That period, that payment pause when none of us have been making payments, going all the way back to March of 2020, that still counts. It doesn't matter what payment plan you're in during this pause, your payments are paused. So as long as your payments are paused, you're getting credit toward public service loan forgiveness. But the rules for the program are you need to be making payments based on your income. And again, Ashley's going to talk more about why this is much, much simpler right now, but these are the rules. You also have to work in public service. And this is something that didn't change. You need to work for an organization the government considers a public service organization, but it doesn't matter what you do there. You can be a lawyer in the general counsel's office. You can be a teacher in a classroom, as long as your employer is a public service organization. That means a government agency, a 501c3 nonprofit, or another kind of private nonprofit organization that performs some specific qualifying services. That's very common in childhood education or healthcare. And you work full-time. That means you work greater than 30 hours a week, or you meet your employer's definition of full-time if that's greater than 30 hours a week. It also means you can work in multiple public service organizations and add up your hours to get to what the government considers a full-time job. These are the rules of the program. They've always been the rules of the program. There's some work being done to try to make them a little bit easier for people to navigate, but right now, this is what it means to work in public service. And you have to do that every month for 120 months or 10 years. And that means that you have to make a payment. Again, this period where payments are paused, the government considers that making a payment, but you have to make a payment. You have to make those payments on time. And there are certainly people that have gotten knocked off track before. This is mostly just a flag that the rules have changed. For a long time, you had to make 120 individual payments, make a payment every month for 120 months for it to count. Those rules have gotten a little bit easier. So you can make a couple months of payments at a time or up to a year of payments at a time. So just know that if you're an older borrower and tried to get public service loan forgiveness before, some of these tricks and traps that have knocked people off track, they've gotten better over time. And then Ashley's going to talk more about how this has really changed for folks and that this is much, much easier right now. But I want to emphasize one more time, during the pandemic, while payments are paused, that counts towards public service loan forgiveness. So if you have not been getting charged interest, not been paying your loans going all the way back to March of 2020, every single one of those months counts as long as you work in public service. But we recognize that this is complicated. And along the way, there's lots of things that have knocked people off track. And as Congressman Clyburn mentioned at the top, 99 out of every 100 public service workers who raised their hand and said, cancel my debt before the Biden administration came in, they were told no. And that's bad. I mean, for many reasons, that's bad. But basically, it feels like people have had this promise broken to them. The government made this deal with a generation of public service workers more than a decade ago and didn't hold up their end of the bargain. This has made headlines across the country for the public service workers on this call that have been struggling to make their way through the system. Your government hurt you. And when Joe Biden came in, he asked public service workers to help him understand what was wrong and how to fix it. And more than 45,000 people shared their stories. Public service workers from across the country said, this is broken, it needs to be simpler, you need to hold up your end of the bargain and cancel our debts. And President Biden listened. With pressure from congressional Democrats, including Congressman Clyburn, the administration actually did right by people and opened up this special opportunity to cancel debts for a generation of public service workers that had been knocked off track before. So with that, I'm going to hand this to my friend Ashley, who's now going to walk through what changed and why it's easy.
Thanks, Mike. And thank you so much, Congressman Clyburn, for putting this together and for all of your leadership and support for student borrowers. It is so necessary and needed. As Mike said, my name is Ashley Harrington. I am a senior advisor at Federal Student Aid and Department of Education, a former consumer advocate, and I'm really excited today because I get to talk about the good stuff. Mike got to talk about how PSLF normally works, right? And it's important to know that because it's going to start working that way again on October 31st, 2022, when this waiver ends. But I get to talk about the really transformative changes that this administration has made to make this work for more borrowers, right? When Mike said fewer than 7,000 people had gotten forgiveness before this waiver, he was right. When the congressman talked about the 99% denial rate, he was right. But now we have increased that. More than 170,000 borrowers have gotten over $9 billion in forgiveness. An additional 1.1 million borrowers have gotten closer to forgiveness. So the things that we're about to talk about are real transformative changes, and they mean real relief for real people, and probably for many of you on the line today. So we can go to the next slide, Mike. So what we're talking about here is called the limited PSLF waiver. The limited PSLF waiver announced last October. It is a rule change for PSLF. So all the rules that Mike talked about that were in effect until October, now they're different, right? Under the waiver, borrowers can get credit for past periods of repayment that otherwise would not qualify for PSLF. So under this waiver, any prior period of repayment is going to count. We're not looking at your repayment plan. We're not looking at your loan program. We're not looking at whether you made a payment in full or on time. We're not even looking at whether you actually made a payment, right? We just want to know, were you in active repayment status? And we are defining that very generously. We are even accepting some periods of deferment and forbearance. You still need qualifying employment, but if you meet these other criteria, and again, we are defining repayment very generously, you can get closer to PSLF forgiveness or even get forgiveness. And so this changes for borrowers with direct loans, because we know that's what PSLF is for, as we talked about earlier. Those who have already consolidated into the direct loan program, and those who consolidate into the direct loan program by October 31st, 2022. If you don't take much away from this webinar, I hope you take away this date, October 31st, 2022, because there are actions you may need to take by this date to take advantage of this waiver. Because after that, this waiver turns into a pumpkin and you will not get these benefits. Now is the time, even if you're not at 120, even if you haven't been in repayment 10 years, even if you hadn't been in repayment for 2 years, you should go ahead and get your forms in, get your application in. It doesn't hurt to get yourself on track for PSLF. So we're gonna talk a little bit more about the waiver. Next slide. So again, payments made prior to consolidation are now eligible. Mike talked about how you could consolidate before. You could consolidate your FEL loans or your Perkins loan, or you can even consolidate direct loans, right? But once you did that, you had to start at zero. You had to start over. Under the waiver, that is not the case. If you have FEL or Perkins loans and you consolidate, you do not have to start at zero. If you previously had FEL or Perkins loans and you consolidate and they told you had to start at zero, you can get credit now for that time spent prior to consolidation. Doesn't matter what repayment plan you were on. We're not looking at that. We don't care. We're not looking at what loan type you have, except for Parent Plus, and we'll talk about that in a second. You still have to be employed full-time for a qualifying employer when every single month you're trying to get credit for, every single month you're trying to get credit for. But this is a big deal. So if you still have FEL or Perkins loans, you have to consolidate by October 31st. And you have to get a PSLF form in by October 31st, because after that, the normal PSLF and TPSLF rules will apply. Next slide. I really just tried to advance it myself. Sorry about that. So you may fall into one of three borrower groups, right? If you only have direct loans, and we're going to talk later about how you know which group you fall into and how you know what type of loans you have. But if you only have direct loans, what you want to do is make sure you have a PSLF form on file for an eligible employer for post-October 2007, because that's when PSLF was created, on file, and get that in, right? You want to submit that, and we'll talk about how you're going to submit, how you apply for PSLF. If you already consolidate into the direct loan program, you want to get a PSLF form in for the time spent prior to consolidation. And if you still have FEL or Perkins loans, you have the most to do, because you have to consolidate your loans into direct consolidation loan program, and you have to get a PSLF form in, and you have to do it all by October 31st, 2022. This is, for any of these groups, this is you effectively raising your hand and saying, I have federal student loans, I'm in public service, I want to qualify for this waiver, I want to get the maximum amount of credit I can right now, and even though I'm not at 120, I want to continue working towards PSLF forgiveness. Next slide. So I want to talk briefly about Parent Plus loans in the waiver. Mike touched on this a little bit, that Parent Plus borrowers are absolutely eligible for PSLF. It's based on the parent's employment, not the student's. It's in the parent's name, so it's going to be based on your employment. So they are eligible for PSLF. Most parents are going to have to consolidate into a direct consolidation loan so they can get access to income-based repayment for PSLF, right? So most Parent Plus borrowers, if they're working towards PSLF, likely have a direct consolidation loan. Under the waiver, you can't get additional credit for that underlying Parent Plus loan. We talked about direct consolidation loans and how FEL borrowers and Perkins borrowers are going to have to consolidate into the direct loan program. That is true. And those borrowers will get additional credit for those underlying loans. That is not the case for Parent Plus borrowers. If you're a Parent Plus borrower and you have a direct consolidation loan with underlying Parent Plus, you won't get any credit, any additional credit. You will get additional credit for the time and repayment when it was already a direct consolidation loan. So if you missed a payment or it was late or it was on the wrong repayment plan, you can get credit for that part when it's after it's consolidated, but not before. Or If you had a Parent Plus loan that you consolidated with your own student loans, and so you have a direct consolidation loan with multiple underlying loans, you could get additional credit for those other underlying loans. Or if you consolidate it now, you could get additional credit for those other underlying loans. But you can't get any additional credit for the time when it's purely Parent Plus. I know it's confusing, but we can talk about it more. I'm sure there'll be questions, but just things to know. If you're a Parent Plus borrower, there's always just a couple of extra steps you want to check out, some more information you want to read because your loans operate slightly differently. Next slide. So a couple of things to know about consolidation. We like to flag these because a lot of folks are going to have to consolidate, right? But consolidation is not without things that happen, right? So your monthly payment may go down, but you may have to pay longer because it's essentially a new loan. However, if you're working towards PSLF and that 120, you probably don't care about this, right? If you have unpaid interest, your principal balance is going to go up because that interest is going to be capitalized. Again, if you're working towards PSLF, you probably don't care about this because that's just more that's going to get forgiven at the end of year 120. Your new consolidation loan will probably have a new interest rate because it's going to be a weighted average of all the loans, of interest rates for all the loans. Again, if you're working towards PSLF and you're on income-based repayment plans, you're probably not worried about this either. And remember, you don't have to consolidate all of your federal student loans. You can consolidate one loan. You can consolidate 5 loans. You can consolidate 8 loans. It doesn't matter, but just know that once you consolidate, you can't undo it. Next slide. So I want to flag one additional thing because I mentioned that we're counting certain periods of forbearances and deferments. We're counting some military-related forbearances and deferments, and we're counting some long-term forbearances. Another thing we announced as part of our effort to provide targeted student loan relief and fix this broken system for how people have to manage their student loans is we know that there are a ton of borrowers who were steered into something called long-term forbearances by their servicers. Because of that, they were in forbearances of 12 or more months consecutive or 36 or more months cumulative, when they could have been on an income-based repayment plan and had a $0 payment or a very low dollar payment. So borrowers who were steered into these long-term forbearances, 12 or more months consecutive or 36 or more months cumulative, can now get credit towards IDR and PSLF. For PSLF, you are still going to have to submit a PSLF form, so certify employment for that time period, but this is also going to help a large number of borrowers who were steered into these forbearances that they didn't need to be in. And we're going to do a lot of this automatically. It's going to take time. It's going to happen later this year. So stay tuned, but that gives you time to get those PSLF forms in the meantime. But this is also going to be a big game changer for a lot of folks. Next slide. So just a note what to expect when you're expecting for those of us who are already in PSLF or who have submitted PSLF forms recently and you're wondering what is going on with my application. So first, you may know that the previous PSLF servicer was a company called Fed Loan Servicing, or FIA. They are no longer servicing federal student loans. So as of May 1, we no longer sent borrowers to FIA. As of July 1, the PSLF servicer is MOHELA. So now when you submit a PSLF form, you're sending it to MOHELA and you'll be transferred to MOHELA. If you were already in the PSLF program, you are getting transferred to MOHELA. I just got transferred this week. More folks are coming. Everyone's going to be transferred by September of this year. And that's okay. My payment count didn't change. My payment didn't change. My plans didn't change. None of that. My terms didn't change. All of that's going to go with you. All of anything you have pending is going to go with you to MOHELA. That's okay. Don't worry about that. But we still say, keep track of your own stuff. Be your own best advocate. Keep track of your paperwork, of your payments, of your forms, all of that, because it never hurts to have backup copies. Next slide. So I'm going to turn it back to Mike to talk about how you identify your student loans.
All right, and now we're really going to get into the weeds here. So as Ashley mentioned, and as we are going to probably mention 20 more times in the rest of the hour, you are going to turn into a pumpkin on Halloween. You have until October 31st to do these things. And if you don't do them, you're going to miss out. And I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't note the Biden administration might choose to give you more time here. That is a decision the president can make. And we joined with hundreds of other organizations, including the NAACP, a number of major labor unions, to call on the administration to give everybody more time. I'm going to mention that again at the end. But right now, the rules are you've got until Halloween to be able to take these steps. And that means first doing a checkup on your student loans, figuring out which of these things you need to do, which forms you need to send in. And that first step is figuring out if you have a direct loan or you have another kind of federal loan, or you have what's called a private student loan, a purely private loan made by Sallie Mae or a bank that can't get on track for public service loan forgiveness. The only way to figure this out is to go to studentaid.gov. And I'm going to show you step by step how you actually do make this work. So to figure out what kind of federal student loan you have, or if you have a loan that's not a federal student loan, you log into studentaid.gov. And studentaid.gov, it's the same place you go to fill out financial aid forms. In the past, you might have needed to pause your student loan payments or learn more about what your student loan repayment options are. So you've gone there before and created an ID to log in. If you haven't done it, it's fast, it's easy. You can do it in a single sitting. You just have to go online and sign up. Once you have that credential, you log in and you go under view details and you can download your student aid data. Again, this is a lot of jargon, and forgivemystudentdebt.org, our website, has really good like step-by-step short videos on how to do this if some of this is confusing. But log on to studentaid.gov and get your student loans. And what you'll see next to your loans are the type of loan you have. If all you have are direct loans, you can skip the next couple steps that we'll talk about, and all you need to do is certify your service. But if you have federal loans that appear here that are not direct loans, particularly Perkins loans or FEL loans, you're going to need to do some other things. In particular, you're going to need to consolidate. So again, if you have one of these older loans, a Federal Family Education Program loan or FFELP loan, or a Perkins loan, a loan made by your school, you have to go through this process also at studentaid.gov to consolidate your loans into a new direct loan. And I know this is a lot of jargon, and I know a bunch of these words are probably words you've never heard before and you may never hear again. If this is confusing, again, forgivemystudentdebt.org has videos that walk you through all of these steps, including actual screenshots of what you're going to see on studentaid.gov, and that can help you unpack some of this stuff. But moving very quickly here, you go through this tool that's on studentaid.gov to fill out what's called a direct consolidation loan application. This is, again, a lot of jargon, but really what you're doing here is you're paying off your old student loans with a new direct consolidation loan. So whoever it is that owns your old federal student loans, you saw them sitting on that list of loans a second ago. Whoever owns them is going to get a check from the Department of Education for what you owe them. They're going to zero out your account, and you're going to have a new direct consolidation loan that you owe directly to the United States government. And that loan is eligible to be canceled through public service loan forgiveness. And it's eligible to get you credit for your entire tenure of public service work, even before you fill out this form. And that is only true right now. It's only true to the end of October, unless Joe Biden extends the waiver. So you need to act now. So you hit start, you're on studentaid.gov, you fill out this form that it helps you populate. You get to choose who your student loan servicer is as part of this. We recommend you choose this company called Mohela, M-O-H-E-L-A. They are the contractor the government has hired to handle all public service loan forgiveness, loan processing. It used to be a different company, it used to be a company called Fed Loan Servicing, but as of July 1st of this year, it is now this company Mohela. So it's better for you to just start there, because you're going to try to get public service loan forgiveness, and they're the experts. So you pick Mohela, you go into the application, you get to fill out a couple fields, it's all stuff you know, and you have to pick the loans that count towards your consolidation. So you want to check all the boxes. You want to include every loan you have in this consolidation loan. And that's because the government's going to give you credit based on the oldest loan that you have in your consolidation loan. And so this is part of the waiver. This isn't how the program used to work. But right now, if you include your oldest loan in this consolidation loan, you're going to get credit towards PSLF for all public service that you performed while you paid that old loan back, even if you have some younger loans wrapped in there. So once you fill out this form, you submit it, and the government's going to process your consolidation. That's the big first thing you need to do if you have one of these older loans. You'll also be able to pick the payment plan you want to be enrolled in whenever payments restart again. And you'll have to sign and certify that this is accurate and these are your loans. Importantly, once you've done that, there's also some steps you take to certify your service. So I'm going to hand this back to Ashley now about the second chunk of things you need to do.
Thanks, Mike. It's me again. that was really helpful. I just want to flag a couple of things. One, if you have Parent Plus loans, you may not want to consolidate all of them because then you're only going to get access to one income-based repayment plan, and it's the least generous. So Parent Plus borrowers should always read the fine print and think a little bit before they click. Just want to flag. And if you want to set yourself up for success after the payment pause is over and after the waiver is over, when you're doing that consolidation application that Mike just showed you, you want to click that you want to be on an income-based repayment plan when you consolidate, because that's going to put you in the best position to continue working towards PSLF when this is over. So next slide. So I'm going to talk to you about how Mike talked about how you find out what type of loans you have and how you consolidate. I'm going to talk to you about how you certify your employment. This is really important because PSLF, one of the biggest things we want to know about you is, do you work for a qualifying PSLF employer? So to find that out, we have a couple of tools. The first one, which we just announced, and we're very excited about it, is what we're calling this employer search tool. Prior to this, all you had to log into our help tool, which we're going to talk about next. You had to have a studentaid.gov account. You had to have all of that ready, and then you could go in and you could look up your employer. Now we have a public facing website, so you can look it up without logging in. Employers can look it up without logging in, and they can see if they're showing up in our database, if they're showing up as eligible or likely ineligible or ineligible, and they can find out where they sit. Now, keep in mind, this database is not the end all be all. It doesn't have every single qualifying PSLF employer, doesn't even have every single qualifying employer. So if your employer is not in there, or it's in there as likely ineligible or ineligible, don't be discouraged. Still continue with the process. If you believe your employer is an eligible PSLF employer, keep going. It just will have to go through a couple of extra steps, but it could be worth it in the end. Okay, next slide. So we're going to talk about how you submit your PSLF form. This is what the physical form looks like, and you can download it and fill it out by hand. But what we really suggest is that you use our PSLF help tool to generate this form. Next slide. And you can find that form at studentaid.gov/PSLF. This is the landing page for the help tool, and this is going to help you certify your employment. So you're going to click log in. Next slide. And when you log in, you're going to log in with your studentaid.gov ID, which you should have or be getting one, because that's the best place to manage your federal student loans and find information. It's where you're going to go to consolidate, where you go to sign up for income-based repayment, and where you go to apply for PSLF. So we're just flagging that there's no separate application for the PSLF waiver. If you've applied for PSLF before, you've applied for the PSLF waiver, because it's just applying for PSLF. It's just that if you apply right now, your time and repayment gets evaluated under the waiver and not under the normal PSLF rules, but it's the same application. And so it's the same place, studentaid.gov/PSLF. So the first thing we're going to ask you for in the employer search tool and in the help tool is something called an EIN, employer identification number. This is something you can find on your pay stub or on box B of your W-2. You are going to need the EIN, the federal employer identification number, for every single employer that you want to get credit for. I can't say that enough. If you look right here, you can see the first thing we ask you for is that number. We don't ask you for the name of the place. We don't ask you for the address. We need that number. You're going to need that number for every single employer you want to certify. So you'll put that number in, you'll put your employment dates in. And then if you work for a federal or state agency or some other entity, it may pop up with multiple names underneath that EIN. You may have to search through and find yours. So you want to make sure you're looking at that. So you'll put it in and it could say green for eligible, or it could say this orange yellow thing, likely ineligible. That really just means undetermined. Don't be discouraged. It just means we don't know yet. It might be or it might not be, but it has to go through our employer adjudication process. Or it could be red, not eligible, meaning that we don't think it's qualified because it's not a qualifying nonprofit or it's a for-profit like Coca-Cola. Even if you get this orangey yellow or the red, or it doesn't pop up at all, it says we don't recognize this EIN, you still want to continue with the process. Don't be discouraged. It just means it's going to have to go through a little bit of extra steps, go through our employer adjudication team, but it doesn't mean your application is going to be just denied. Next slide. So once you put in employers, you can put in multiple employers during one session. You're going to go to section 2, loan tips. This is going to give you some information about the waiver and COVID-19 forbearance. Next slide. It's going to ask you, do you think you made 120 payments? Yes or no. You have to put whatever our system thinks. So if our system doesn't think you made 120, even though you do, because you're counting those pre-consolidation ones, you still have to put no to move forward. Doesn't do anything with how your application is processed. It's just something you have to answer. Next slide. Then you're going to verify your personal information. Because you logged into your student aid account, it's going to be pre-populated, but if you need to change it, you can in account settings. Next slide. Then you're going to click review and save, and you're going to make sure everything's right. You might have multiple employers. You're going to make sure your application type, your personal information is the same. Next slide. Then if your employer was in our tool list as eligible, you're going to generate a PDF form that looks like that first form I showed you, but it's going to be all filled out. Now that you have this form, you have to sign it and you have to get it signed by your employer. And every single employer you're trying to get certified is going to have to be signed by you and by your employer. So if you put in multiple EINs, multiple employers are going to be in that PDF, and you're going to have to get each of them signed. Here comes the fun part, because you want to make sure you're following our signature requirements, which we'll talk about next. And once you get those signatures, you're either going to have to mail it in or fax it in. Yes, I did say mail or fax. Or if you already have MOHELA as your servicer, you can upload it online to their website. But if not, you're going to have to mail it or fax it in. I know. We're working on digital submission next year. Next slide. So you want to make sure you're at your meaningless signature requirements, right? We don't accept DocuSign or digital certificate-based signature. Sorry. You can do hand-drawn, like on your mouse or with your finger. You can do a scanned photo of a signature, or you can literally do a wet signature where you print it out, sign it in ink, and scan it back in or mail it. But you can't do that digital certificate-based signature. You can't do the cursive font signature. Please don't try it. I have tried it. They have sent my form back, and it is annoying. So make sure you're following the signature examples and requirements. Next slide. Okay, turn it back over to Mike for a couple application reminders. And then I think we're getting close to the end and we can take questions, right, Mike?
All right, yep, this is the end. Home stretch, guys. So I'm gonna flag a couple things that Ashley mentioned about steps in this process where people get knocked off track. And that is particularly true with the signatures and the forms. So the first thing I wanted to make sure we flag here, if you make a mistake on the form, just do a new form. I know this is annoying. This is particularly annoying if you're trying to get your employer to certify your form and you finally got a hold of somebody in HR or in your management that's willing to take a second to do the thing you need them to do, and they've made a mistake. But this thing where folks sometimes hand correct or correct into a signature to memorialize a mistake, this system is very old. It's very clunky. The people reviewing these forms do a lot of them very fast. They're just going to reject your form and they're going to make you do it again. So save yourself the pain, get it right the first time, even if it takes a little bit more processing on your employer's end to make sure that it's correct. Make sure it's just correct and has a single signature in the right place, and it's a wet signature or it's a scribble, not a font or a digital signature. Also important, there's a lot of documents out there that were created under the original rules of the program. I mentioned at the very top, all the tricks and traps that knocked 99% of people out of progress towards PSLF back when the program was first created. You might get notices from your student loan company that have information about the way things used to be. Do not lose faith. Do not ignore what Ashley and I have told you today. Studentaid.gov is correct. ForgiveMyStudentDebt.org is correct. Your servicer is probably wrong. Just keep moving forward. That is true where you get these warnings saying you have older loans that don't qualify. They do now, only till October, but they do now. So don't lose faith. Don't listen to stuff that seems wrong. Trust Ashley and I. Trust Studentaid.gov. There's some bad information out there. We are all sorry it exists. It makes this very frustrating, but we got to just work through it. That is also true on the public service loan forgiveness help tool that Ashley just mentioned. The tool was built for the old rules. So there's a place where it's not going to realize that your older loans will actually help you get on track to get canceled. And it's going to say, based on your loan information, you haven't actually served in public service for a decade. If you know you worked for a decade and you're just trying to certify your service and get your debt canceled, ignore this thing. Keep moving through. You might have to check a box that doesn't seem right. Just keep clicking through the tool to be able to fill out your form and get your debts canceled. The last thing I want to flag one more time is that you might get forms from your student loan company that tell you that only a couple of your payments have counted towards public service loan forgiveness, when you know you've done all the things that Ashley and I have told you to do, and you're going to get 120 months worth of credit, or 50 months worth of credit, or 75 months worth of credit. If your student loan company tells you you've only got 3 eligible months, just ignore it and keep certifying your service, keep filling out your forms, keep consolidating your loans, do everything we say to do before October. And the government is going to go back through and reconcile all this payment counting stuff, and you're going to get the credit you deserve. These are the new rules. This is going to work. It has canceled 170,000 people's loans already. You just need to work your way through the noise and recognize that some of the stuff is going to feel wonky. So I just wanted to flag one more time, trust what you read on studentaid.gov, trust what you read on forgivemystudentdebt.org. If your student loan company is telling you something that seems sideways, they've got it wrong. So with that, I'm going to hand this back to Ashley, and she's going to take us out, I think. And then we're going to answer some questions.
Yep, this is my last time. And that's absolutely right. So a lot of those letters that Mike pointed out are auto-generated. So don't be discouraged. It's just the system cranks them out. We try to put explainers on there, disclaimers, but I know that it can be confusing, but just work with us, stay with the process. This administration is committed to making sure every public servant gets the credit they earn. So don't worry about that. So next slide, I just want to leave you with some resources and make sure you have them. Oh, first a reminder, just to recap, take advantage of the waiver. You want to confirm your employer is qualified. You can use our employer search tool. You want to consolidate your loans if you need to, and you want to get a PSLF form in using our help tool, and you want to do it all by October 31st, 2022. Next slide. And here are some resources. For the best place to go for information about the waiver is studentaid.gov/PSLF waiver. The best place to go for the help tool is studentaid.gov/PSLF. For general PSLF information and how it's all going to work when the waiver is over, it goes to studentaid.gov/public service. And remember, you're submitting PSLF forms to MOHELA now.